Do you want to go from this to this? Well, stick around and I'll show you how we did it. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Shark Shed channel. I know it's been a minute since we've done any videos, but today we're going to be working on this shelving project. We first started off by measuring out where we wanted the brackets to be held against the wall. And this is pretty much how my wife and I deal with projects. I pretty much explain to her how I'm going to do things, and then she says that it's all wrong, and she explains to me how I'm going to do it in the exact same terms that I use, but in her own words. And then I just say, yes, dear, and we move on. So anyway, we found where all the studs were, and we started putting in all the brackets, make sure everything is nice and straight and plumb. I use my trusty 4-foot level. The thing that we wanted to make sure we did was we wanted to make sure that we marked out where all of the brackets were, and we also wanted to make sure that we had all the holes pre-drilled, because what I didn't want to do was paint the walls, then do all of this measuring and marking and drilling, and then have a bunch of white spots where all these holes would be, just in case I messed up. So this is just an easy way to make sure that we take care of things and that they are put in a way that we can just paint, and then the holes will just be there when we're all done. So next, my wife jumped in here and she did what she does best, which is paint. Notice she doesn't use any tape. She pretty much cuts everything in on her own. We decided to go with a Behr product. The paint color is called Cracked Pepper, and it's just a rich gray that just does a really good job of covering the wall, and we use the eggshell sheen to it. So funny moment here when I startled my daughter when we turned on this planer. We decided to go with something that was a little bit on the less expensive side, so we went with some stock dimensional lumber, and this is a 2x12x10, and we went ahead and went a little bit longer than what we needed. The space that we were using is only going to require about 9 feet, but I did this for a specific reason, and that's because when you plane these, the planer actually gouges a little bit at the ends, and this gave me enough room that I could actually cut those pieces off and get the exact same size that I need. Now, the secret to planing, especially when you're using the same boards over and over, is that you plane every single board together at the same time. When I passed the board through the planer, on one side I did it to all 3 boards, and then I adjusted the height, and then I ran all 3 boards through it again. And this gives us a very consistent thickness to the boards. They all came out to about a little over 1/4 of an inch that I took off, and that did 2 things. It made everything nice and flat, and then it also gave me a little bit less weight up on the wall. These brackets are actually really strong that we're putting up, but this gave us the ability to just take off a little bit of material and made things just a little bit lighter when it went up on the wall. We're not putting anything really heavy on here, but at the same time, we don't want to go crazy on it. So now I brought out my chop saw. We made sure we took off the piece that was gouged by the planer, and we took that off, and that gives us a nice clean cut. And then we flipped it around and we measured off 9 feet, made our mark, and then we basically did the same thing with all 3 boards. This gave us a nice clean edge, and it made the boards exactly the same, so when you're standing in front of these shelves, they look exactly the same no matter where you're standing. Typically the eye doesn't pick up something like that, especially against a dark background. You never know what it's going to look like, so I wanted to make sure that the shelves were exactly the same size. So now that I'm done, clean up everything, and this is just a story of having a small shop. Everything's on wheels, so I'm able to get things out of the way and move on. Now this part to me is one of the more tedious parts, which is the sanding. Now I'm not really worried about these edges. I'm not joining anything, so I didn't have to run it through a joiner. I didn't really care about the imperfections on the edge. In fact, it gives a little bit of a live edge feel to it in some spots, but I wanted things to be nice and smooth so that the stain would take and that it would look pretty much even all the way across the board on all the different boards. But start off with about a 60 grit, and then I moved on to a 100 grit, and then I ended up at about a 220, and that was about the right amount of smoothness that I needed for the purposes that I was using these boards for. Now the next step is I take my compressor and I wanted to make sure that I got into all those little crevices. Now I'm not filling any of these crevices. I kind of like having the character of the board, but I also didn't want a bunch of sawdust in there, because when you put that clear coat on there, it would actually look a little weird if it was white or if it didn't pick up the stain. So I want to make sure I got everything out of there, blew it all out with my compressor, and I did that across all the sides. Now keep in mind, these shelves are pretty high, so you're gonna be able to see them from underneath, so I had to make sure that all sides were really clean from all that sawdust. And then here I just took a nice damp cloth and I wiped everything down, got rid of as much as I can. Now the stain that we're using is going to be a red mahogany. These are pine boards. I just like that rich color, especially against that dark background. I want to make sure that I got a rich color, and the red mahogany seemed to do the trick. Now when you're staining boards, the thing you need to make sure that you do is that you go across all the boards at the same thickness at the same time. And the reason why is because you're going to wipe all of the excess off. And so you want to kind of be pretty methodical about this. Like, make sure you don't spend more time on one board than the other one, because the longer the stain stays on there, the darker it's going to be. So if you leave it longer on one board over another one, those boards are going to be darker. So make sure that you get to those and then wipe them off with a nice clean rag. Now the clear coat is this polyacrylic, and I used my Finish Max sprayer that I got from rockler.com. I will put a link in the description if you're interested. This thing I've used for several years, and it works fantastic. So when you are putting this stuff down, since it is going through a sprayer and it is a mister, you want to make sure that you use one of these little screens to take out any particles. Now this is a brand new can, so I wasn't terribly worried about it. Sometimes there's like a little bit of a skin on the top of the can, and so you want to make sure that you screen all that stuff out. So when we start spraying, the thing you need to keep in mind is that when you are spraying, that you're just going nice and even over everything. You don't want to sit there and stay in one spot and let it pull up. So you're only pulling the trigger when you're moving. If you stop moving, you need to stop pulling that trigger. I just want to make sure that I got about 3 or 4 coats on every single one of the boards. We want to make sure it's nice and even, that we put about the same amount of thickness on everything. Between every coat, I took 220 sandpaper, and I just kind of knocked down the really thick parts. Anywhere that I had some running or that there was some dust that had settled on the board, I'm going through and I'm sanding it, and I just want to make sure that it's nice and clean. It's a nice little light sand. You get a little bit of whiteness to it, but that's no big deal. From here, you're going to take a wet rag and you're going to wipe it off. I used my compressor to take off all the excess at first, and then I went through and wiped it all off. And then we go through and just keep spraying. So same idea, you're not going as thick this time, you're just making sure that you get a nice clean coat. And as you can see from the reflection, things go on nice and smooth and even, and did a pretty good job with that. Let it dry overnight, and the next day I set up another little paint stand here. I've got paper on the ground. This is clear coat, but I just didn't want to get stuff everywhere. I like working clean. So I set them down, and I did the same thing on the other side. Again, you're going to be able to see both sides of these shelves because they are kind of high, so I want to make sure that I got really good coverage on both sides. And again, same idea. Don't sit in one place too long because it will start to pool and run on you, and you just kind of keep going. And you can see from the reflection that you get a lot of overspray, so that little piece of paper that I put down on the ground really didn't do much good, but you know, I felt better about it, and that's all that matters. And then we do a little light sand in between, make sure we get rid of all those particles that may have set on there, clean it all off, wipe it all down, and then put another coat on there. And like I said, I did about 4 or 5 coats on each side, and that seemed to be the perfect amount on there. It gives it good protection, and it's nice and smooth and clean. All right, now we're finally ready to install these shelves. These brackets are really good brackets. They're powder coated. I got them on Amazon. I'll put a link in the description down below if you want to get a set of your own. They were very sturdy. We really like them, and they look really good. So we've got our holes that have already been pre-drilled. We've already put the anchors in where we needed them, and we've got the holes in the studs already, so we're ready to go there. And I put all of these brackets in first. And one of the things that I did as I put these brackets in was that I tightened them all the way down and made sure that they were nice and snug. Well, you'll see later on in the video that I actually loosened these off the wall just a little bit, and that gave me a little bit more play when I was attaching these brackets to the shelves themselves. But for now, this gives me the ability to tighten it all up and make sure that everything is level. That's the beauty of having a nice big level. You can put it across everything and you can make sure that nothing's gonna be off. So I pretty much finished up all of these brackets, got them all installed, and then we're ready to get the shelves in here. The shelves are not light. Like I said, these are 2x12s, and at this point they are 9 feet long. I'm not sure what the weight is, but I'd say it's probably a good 20 to 30 pounds. But as you can see, I start putting all these screws in underneath, and I realize that, there's not a lot of play on some of these. The wall is actually not even, so it's a little bit of a bow. So I decided to loosen it from the wall first, attach all the brackets to the shelves, and then I came through and tightened everything up to the wall at that point, and everything looked really good. These hold a lot of weight. I've got, as you can see at the end, you'll see what I have on there. I got a few books, I got a few other things on there. None of it's super heavy, but none of it's light either, so it kind of works out. So here you go, this is the finished product. Super proud of the way this looks. Those black brackets up against that rich charcoal color looks really good. And also I kind of like the gloss of that powder coating up against the eggshell paint. This is a Behr product and the color is cracked pepper if you are interested. We saw this in another video, loved it, and I've been looking for the right project to use it on, and this seemed to do the trick. And you can see the edges on some of it's really clean, some of it isn't, but I really like this character. And like I said, it didn't want it to be super polished, but I also didn't want it to be sloppy. So it's a good mix of everything, and it's able to hold all the stuff that I used to have on top of my cabinet before. So really like this. If you have any questions, feel free to comment down below, or you can email me at the email in the description. I'm happy to answer any questions. This whole thing only cost me a couple $100s. The brackets were actually the most expensive thing, and lumber when I built this wasn't exactly the cheapest, but it still worked out to a pretty cost-effective solution for my needs. Anyway, if you like this video, don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe, and if you want to be notified of future videos, don't forget to hit that bell, and we'll see you on the next one. Have a great week, everybody.